Okay, welcome back. So we're on 2023 question paper 11. Okay, a couple of difficult questions in this paper, October, November. So we'll start at the bottom. Okay, 30. An economy is experiencing cost push inflation. Okay, so we know that the cost of production has gone up. The inflation is generated by AS moving to the left. Which group is least likely to be concerned by this? So a nice easy question to start. What we should know by now is that borrowers are the ones who will be least likely to be concerned by inflation, because they can actually benefit through inflation from paying back on the interest for their loans a smaller amount than inflation would actually be. So if the interest rate that they borrow at is actually, and it's fixed, if it is less than the rate of inflation, they're going to be paying back less in terms of the real value of what they're paying. Consumers will obviously be affected by or concerned by inflation because their purchasing power is decreasing. Creditors will also be concerned by inflation because they're the ones who are giving to the borrowers, so they may be receiving less in real value than what the inflation actually is. And exporters will obviously be affected by inflation as well and concerned by it, because the price of goods and services is going up, which is making their exports more expensive to other countries. Okay, 29. Which combination would represent the most expansionary set of monetary policies? So what are we looking for here? Credit availability, we're going to be looking for that to go up because we want people to be able to borrow money. So we would expect that the availability of credit should increase. We would expect interest rates to come down because that is the expansionary monetary policy. And we would expect the money supply to come up because that is another expansionary monetary policy. Okay, so if we match those up, increase, down, up, we're left with B. Okay, now credit availability might be trying to trick you out here because we're used to understanding credit regulations. Regulations are just the rules and restrictions on borrowing. So we would actually reduce the regulations. But when we reduce the regulations, that makes the availability or the ease at which people can borrow to increase. So reducing credit regulations actually increases the credit availability. 28. Government of a country plans to raise income taxes. Initial equilibrium is represented by point X. What new equilibrium? Okay. Excuse me. Very simple. Raising income taxes is a contractionary fiscal policy. It is designed to take money out of people's pockets. So it is designed to reduce consumer expenditure and reduce investment, which will result in aggregate demand decreasing or aggregate demand moving to the left. So therefore, if we start at an initial equilibrium of D and we follow our AD shift to the left, we will be left at point D. Okay, over a period of a year, the annual rate of inflation becomes negative. Okay. Which statement must be correct? So, cost of living has fallen, purchasing power of money has fallen, standard of living has increased, there's been an increase in the consumer price index. Okay, so if we have the annual rate of inflation becoming negative, what we're going to have is the cost of living has gone down. Okay, now why? If it becomes negative, what is essentially happening is that our cost of living has come down because the same amount of money that we have now is now worth more than it was last year. As it becomes negative, that creates deflation, right? So the purchasing power of money would not fall, the purchasing power of money would actually go up, which is explained by a decrease in the cost of living. Standard of living would not be affected, or it may be affected, but it can't be determined just from the information we've been given. We'd have to use our HDI calculators, etc. And there's been an increase in the consumer price index. Well, we know that's wrong because we've been told it's negative, so there's a decrease in the consumer price index. Okay, 26. Now, what I want to show you guys first is a paper that I literally just recorded. A Bangladeshi citizen, so this looks like the exact same question, right? A Bangladeshi citizen is employed as a construction worker in Qatar, and he sends some of his wages to his family in Bangladesh. How will this be recorded on Qatar's balance of payments? And we said that that's recorded as a part of the net primary income. Okay. Now, one thing that we need to be aware of is that this worker in this case was a construction worker. Okay. Now, in general, it's not great on Cambridge's behalf with these kind of questions. They should specify really, but in general, what we're going to have is a banker who lives and works in India is going to be a long-term resident in general, right? So that's the assumption that we have to make. Now, when we have income that's sent home, it's generally split between primary and secondary income. So it's only primary income in the account or in the case that it can be classified as compensation of employees, which are short-term, right? So let's say less than the period of a year where someone is working in another country and sending that money home. But as they become a long-term resident, so that if they're living in the foreign country, working and transferring money for more than a year, it's referred to as workers' remittances, which is actually recorded. So living and working in a foreign country for more than a year, it's basically the same thing, but it's referred to as workers' remittances, which are recorded in the secondary income account, not actually in the primary income account. Okay, so in this case, what we have to assume or what we have to identify is the type of person who's employed, and therefore where they're most likely to fit in under the current account. So a Kenyan banker who lives and works in India is likely to be recorded in the secondary income as workers' remittances, because they're more likely, certainly due to the fact that it's a skilled job, to have been or to be a long-term resident in that country. So in this case, what we'll see is that it will result in a fall in secondary income for India. That's true, because it is an outflow in the secondary income for India, right? So it's going to be recorded as a debit on their secondary income. Remember, credits is the money that comes in, debits are the outflows or the money that goes out. So it has nothing to do with the trade balance in services for Kenya. It has nothing to do with an increase in the current account surplus for India. In fact, it will result in the opposite, right? It will reduce the surplus or increase the deficit because it's money coming out. It's a negative recorded in their current account balance of payments. And like we said, it's not an increase in the primary income for Kenya, because it will actually be recorded in Kenya's secondary income due to the fact that it's a long-term resident who has been out of the country for more than a year. Now, I understand where you're coming with the question. You might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. They should specify it, and I agree, they should. But we can generally identify it by the type of labour. Is it skilled or unskilled labour? In the question or in the example that was provided in this one, construction workers employed in Qatar are likely to be unskilled labour. They're not likely to be long-term residents. They're more likely to be part of that compensation of employees, which is where they're sending wages back, where they're working for a period of less than a year. Okay, and they won't be recorded as a resident of that country. Okay, 25. What would be the most likely reason for a decrease in frictional unemployment. So remember that frictional unemployment is a short-term form of unemployment where people are left in between jobs. Okay? Now, when we're going for in between jobs, the way to decrease frictional unemployment is to try and increase the occupational and or geographical mobility of labour. Okay, one of the ways we can do that is that we can provide more information on labour job vacancies, because what this is directly going to address is search unemployment, which is a form of frictional unemployment, where people are in between jobs and they're searching for jobs. They may not accept the first offer because they view themselves as being more valuable, so they're going to wait until they get a job offer that they deem they would be worth. Right? More government spending on education, that would be a measure that we could use to address structural unemployment, for example, which is more of a long-term unemployment. Because, again, spending on education is also a long-term effect, right? More demand for public sectors and more intensive or more capital-intensive manufacturing, they're not going to have an effect on frictional unemployment, because they're short term. They're not going to help us to get more people into jobs, right, which is what we want. So if we provide information on labour market vacancies, it will directly address search unemployment, which is one of our forms of frictional unemployment. Okay, 24. So general equilibrium in an economy is achieved when total injections are equal to total leakages. What is most likely to cause disequilibrium in the macroeconomy in the short run? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, I'm going to put it up here, right? So leakages and injections, we need to know what our leakages are and we need to know what our injections are. So our leakages, and we'll provide an example in this case, right? Our leakages are savings, taxation, or put imports and taxation. Okay, it doesn't matter the order that you put them in. And then our injections are investment, government spending, and exports. Okay, so what we need in the economy is that we need the savings to be equal to the injections, right? So if we take one of our examples here, and we'll say part A, we're going to assume first, we're going to create a scenario where they're equal. So let's just say that they're all worth 40 each, okay? Because 40 is the biggest number that's referenced here. Instead of having to go and deal with minus figures, we can just assume that they're all 40. So in this case, our total injections and our total leakages in the economy would be 120 equals 120. Okay, so if we have an increase in government spending of 10 billion plus a decrease in exports, will we still remain in equilibrium? So savings will stay the same, imports will stay the same, taxation will stay the same, investment will stay the same, government spending will go up to 50, but exports will come down to 30. We will still have 120 equals 120. So A is therefore incorrect because we remain in equilibrium. If we calculate B, once we know this, all we have to do is import our figures, right? So savings will still be the same. Imports, we say imports here, no, stay the same. Taxation will stay the same, so 120 for our leakages. For our injections, investment goes up to 70, plus 40 for government spending, plus 40 for exports. But the thing I forgot to take out here is that we have a decrease in household savings of 10 million. So what we're going to have in this case is leakages of 10 plus 40 plus 40, which is 90 million, equaling 150 million for the total level of injections. So B is therefore the correct answer, because that will result in disequilibrium. Our savings or our leakages here do not equal our injections. Okay, now if you just follow this and you put in these figures down here for C and D, you should see that we will end up with the same equilibrium. So I don't think there's any need to go through those. Okay, now let me just move this down. So I can just leave it over here. Okay, it's still there anyway. So, under which conditions will nominal GDP and real GDP increase at the same rate in an economy? Okay, so remember that nominal GDP is relating to our change in prices, but it is before, so it's before we account for inflation, right? So if our nominal GDP and our real GDP are going to be the same before inflation, then what we would have to have by definition is we would have to have a rate of change in the price level being 0. Okay, because if there is a change in the price level, then there is an adjustment that is needed from nominal to real GDP. So straight away we can see what our correct answer is if we have that information. And our correct answer is going to be C. So a 2% change of national output per annum will result in a real GDP increase of 2% plus a nominal GDP increase of 2%. Because we have no inflation or no change in the price level, there will be no difference between the nominal and the real GDP levels. Remember, to get to real GDP, we just need to take away the CPI figure or calculate nominal GDP as with the rate of inflation that has happened. Okay, 22. So, which item is not included in the current account on the balance of payments? Again, this is very simple. So this is the purchase of foreign assets is not included. Profits from foreign investments, interest on foreign loans, and exports of services, they will all be included in one of the 3 or one of the 4 components of our balance of payments, which is balance of trade goods, balance of trade services, primary income, secondary income. Okay. So, question 21. Why is increased government provision of education most likely to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right? Okay, it will increase aggregate supply. Well, that's not going to shift our aggregate demand curve to the right, is it? So we're looking for a reason why one of the components of AD is going to increase, which will be C or I or G or X minus M. So, more schools will be built. What will that do? That is going to result in an increase in investment, right? So that's going to result in a movement in AD to the right. So therefore, that is going to be our correct answer in this case, because we can link it directly back to one of the components of aggregate demand. The government will have to raise taxes. That's not necessarily going to increase our aggregate demand, right? Remember that if they raise taxes, what is that likely to do? That is likely to move AD to the left anyway, and workers will be more highly skilled. That's something that may increase our productivity. It may allow us over the long run to move our AS, but that is not going to be relating to any components of AD here. The fact that they're more skilled doesn't mean that expenditure, investment, government spending, exports or imports will necessarily increase, so we can't assume that AD will move. Okay, question 20. So the PPC shows for country X and country Y, two countries in the world. Both countries produce two goods, country or M and N. Under which terms of trade will both country X and country Y benefit from trading with each other? So what we need to do is we need to calculate the opportunity cost for each country. Okay, now the theory behind this terms of trade between each countries is that what we're looking for is we're looking for a trade level or a proposed trade level that will lie between the opportunity costs of the countries. Okay, so when we calculate our opportunity cost, beneficial terms of trade will be any term of trade that lies between the opportunity costs for the two countries in this example. So we're only looking at M, right? What 1M gives. So for country Y, the opportunity cost of making 1M is going to be 3/4 or 0.75, right? 3/4 of N. Where for country X, the opportunity cost of making 1M is going to be 1N. Okay, so now we're looking for a term and trade agreement that lies between this. 1 into 0.75 does not lie between it because that is the opportunity cost for country Y. 1 to 1 also does not because that's the opportunity cost for X. And 1 for 2 is not between them, it's outside it. So the option that we have the most beneficial will be 1M for 0.8N, which is between the two opportunity costs. Okay, question 19. Won't spend too long on this one. Which statement best describes the consumer price index? It is a measure of the average change in prices of a basket of goods and services over time. Okay, simple. Just learn the definition of CPI. It is not a measure of changes in the spending patterns. That is a component of CPI, right? So we use the weighting of different categories to calculate our CPI, and that reflects the spending patterns of the average household. It does not measure the standard of living at all. It just measures the rate of inflation. And it's not a measure of the level of prices of all goods and services. It's a measure of the change in the prices. And it's of the basket of goods and services. We can't include everything. Okay, so things are categorized. 4 students have to fill in the gaps in the sentences shown. A person is defined as unemployed if they are able, available, and willing to work at the current wage rate. Okay. Sorry, my pen is going all over the place here. So remember that the definition of unemployed is that they have to be actively searching for a job and willing and able to work in order to be unemployed. So therefore, if they are able to work and they're willing to work at the current wage rate, then if they can't find a job, they would be classified as unemployed. Okay, again, very simple. No real explanation needed on A, B, or C. This pen. Anybody wants to sponsor a new laptop, feel free. Okay, 17. What is not included in the measurement of national income? So again, what's national income? It's the money that we're receiving essentially, right? But the thing about national income is that anything that's classified as a, I'm going to say TP or a transfer payment, is not included in that national income. Okay. Now the dividends paid to shareholders would be included in national income. It's not a transfer payment, it is a payment we receive from having equity in a firm. The profits retained by companies is also included in the national income. It's profits they get to keep, and so is the rent paid to landlords. So that is a reward for that particular factor of production. However, benefits that are paid to the unemployed, they're transfer payments. So they're not included in national income because essentially they're just transferring the income that was already generated through the collection of the tax, and they're passing them on to these unemployed individuals. There's no actual creation of income, it's just more so a transfer from one person to another essentially. Okay, 16. A government has increased output with no effect on the price level. What must have been the initial level of aggregate demand? Okay, so what we can see here is that the price level is increased from AD3 to AD4. Okay, so that's generated inflation. The same is from AD2 to AD3. So the only one that hasn't is when we have lots of spare capacity in the economy, when our Keynesian aggregate supply curve is relatively elastic, which will be AD1. And we can see that in the curve very simply, right? Easy question. AD1 to AD2, output has gone up, but we've got no change in the price level here on our vertical axis. Okay, table shows the tax an individual would pay at different levels of income. What is the average rate of taxation and the marginal rate of taxation for an individual with an annual income of 50k? Okay, so the first thing is the average rate of taxation is the tax that we're paying as a percentage of our total income, right? So that's going to be 8,000 divided by 50,000, because we're paying 8,000 of tax and our income is 50, so that's going to leave us with an average rate of taxation of 16%. Now the marginal rate is the difference between the next level or the next threshold, right, and the percentage that we are paying at that threshold. So the marginal rate here is going to be relating to the threshold from 40k to 50k and the extra tax that we pay. So what we can see is that the tax we are paying between that threshold is $2,000 in tax, and the size of the threshold is $10,000. Okay, so therefore the marginal rate of taxation that we're paying is 20%. Question 14. A government introduces charges for vehicles using the roads in its capital city. Which characteristic must the roads have for this to be successful in reducing congestion? Okay, very straightforward question. If they're introducing charges, what is the characteristic that it has to show? The roads have to be excludable, right? Because we can't charge a price if they're not excludable. So, in order for us to reduce the congestion, the fact that they have to pay for it means that there's going to be less people using vehicles, which means that we will have less congestion. Okay, they don't have to be merit goods, because merit goods would not be needing to reduce congestion in the first place, because they would generate external benefits, not external costs, which is what congestion must be. So again, if they're non-rivalrous, we couldn't charge a price for it, and they don't have to be public goods, because then they would be non-excludable and non-rivalrous, which would be the same as the characteristic shown in part C here, which means we wouldn't be able to charge a price for it in the first place. We'd have the free rider problem, and then it would be very difficult for us to reduce the congestion that would be involved if they happened to be public, which they're not. Okay, question 13. In the diagram, S1 is the supply curve and D1 is the initial demand for face mask X. A rival firm produces face mask Y, which is a close substitute. What would cause the demand curve to shift to D2? Okay, so look, we're looking for a reason that's going to shift the demand curve to the right. Now, the substitute that we have here will be our reason, right? A decrease in the cost of materials to make face mask X. We're shown face mask X. What would that do? That would move our supply curve for face mask X to the right. A decrease in the cost of materials to make face mask Y. That would move the supply curve for face mask Y to the right. Okay. An increase in the price of face mask X. Well, what that would do is that would reduce our demand, right? So we would have a contraction in demand in that case. We would not have an increase in demand, which is a factor affecting a shift. But if we have an increase in the price of the substitute, which is face mask Y, there will be less people buying that substitute and there will be more people buying our face mask, which is X. Question 12. Which event is most likely to enable firms to respond to an increase in demand by increasing supply rather than just raising price? Okay, so what we're looking for here is what will allow us to increase our supply level, to shift our supply level essentially, right? Now, if we reduce the expenditure on the training of workers, that is definitely not going to help us increase our supply. If import duties are increased on machines that increase the speed of production, therefore would help us to become more productive, that is also in no circumstances going to help us increase our supply. And if trade unions become strong, leading to poor labour productivity, again, how is that possibly going to affect us by increasing our supply? It's not. So buffer stock schemes would be the option here because they will directly address the supply levels. Now, if we just show quickly an effect of what might happen with these buffer stock schemes, and then I'll give you just a very brief explanation of what they are again. So what we're saying here essentially is that the demand is going to increase, right? So we're going to have a shift in the demand to the right. Or we're going to have an initial equilibrium here of P and an initial equilibrium quantity of Q. Let me move this down slightly. Okay, so we have had an increase in the demand, which has shifted the demand, so we would expect the price to go up and the supply to extend. However, when we have a buffer stock scheme, we may be able to increase our supply level, which may bring down our price or keep our price the same, depending on whether the shift in the supply is the same as the shift in the demand. So what happens in this case? So why does that happen? Why do we have an increase in the supply? So remember that a buffer stock scheme is essentially a scheme where the government are going to buy the commodity, right? So in this case, we don't know what that commodity is because they don't tell us the product. But whatever it is they're making, they will buy, and then they will store those for later when there happens to be a shortage where we have the excess demand. Okay, so governments will actually purchase it from the producer and then store it, which will mean that their supply level will increase. Okay. Buffer stock schemes are covered in your slides and your notes on Unit 3. Okay, the table shows the demand schedule for textbooks. What can be concluded from this information? Okay, profit will be maximized. We can't conclude profit from this, can we? Because remember, if we multiply the quantity demanded by the price, that just tells us our total revenue. We don't know, we don't have any information on the cost of the firm, so we can't conclude profit from any of this info. revenue be maximized at 40? Well, we can see that's wrong, because 400 by 10 is going to be 4,000, right? But 300 by 20 is going to be 6,000. So we'd actually have total higher revenue at a price of $20. Revenue would increase if the price was decreased from 40 to 30. So revenue at 40 would be 4,000. Revenue at $30 would be 6,000. 200 multiplied by 30. So we can see that that one is correct. Okay, and revenue would not be maximized at 40. We've just shown that. Okay, in the diagram, the supply curve shows the number of spaces in a car park, and the demand curve shows the demand for spaces on 4 days. D1, D2, D3, D4. The owner wishes to charge a parking fee on each of these days to allocate the spaces according to the market mechanism. Which pricing policy should the owner use? Okay, so basically, they should try and be responsive to the changes in demand, right? So it would only make sense that the pricing policy they should use is that they should vary the policy price between P1 and P4. In other words, on the days when the demand is D1, they put the price at P1. And on the days when the demand is D4, they put the price at P4. And for D3 and D2, the same on those particular days, right? That's going to be the most efficient pricing structure. If they set the fixed price at P4, the demand is going to be much lower on, let's say it's just day 1, day 2, and day 3. So therefore it's not going to be an efficient pricing structure. The same with B and the same with C. So the one we want them to be is the one that's most responsive, which is obviously setting the price to meet the demand on each of the particular days. So they'll be varied based on the demand for those days. Okay, simple. The supply S of a product is determined by the equation S equals 10 plus 10p, when P is the price of the product in dollars. What is the product's price elasticity of supply when its price rises from $1 to $2? Okay, so let's figure out what it is at $1 first, right? So when it's at $1, it's going to be 10 plus 10 into 1, which is going to be 20. Okay? When it's at $2, it's going to be 10 plus 10 multiplied by 2, which is going to be 30. Okay, so figure out what our percentage change in QD is. Our percentage change in QS, sorry. So our percentage change in quantity supplied, our new quantity supplied is 30, our old quantity supplied is 20. So our change is going to be 10 over 20, which is going to be 50% change. Right? Now our change in price, we've gone from $1 to $2. So 1 over 1 is going to be a change in price of 100%. Our price has essentially doubled, right? So all we have to do is input our formula. Quantity supplied goes on top, percentage change in price goes on bottom. 50% divided by 100% gives us a PES value of 0.5. Okay, question 8. The cross elasticity of demand between good P and good Q is minus 0.4, and the cross elasticity of demand between good P and good OR is plus 0.6. Which combination of goods is most likely to be represented by this information? So what we're looking for is what we should know at this stage. Cross elasticity, when it's a negative, that means that it's a complement. And when it is a plus figure, that means that it is a substitute. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking for. We know that good P and good Q are complements. So let's look at good P and good Q first. So cream and yogurt, they're definitely not complements. If anybody eats cream with yogurt, I think that's quite strange. Yogurt and strawberry, okay, possibly, yeah, they'll be complements. Strawberry and cream for sure, yeah. Wimbledon is the famous example. And strawberry and raspberry, they're more likely to be substitutes, aren't they, rather than complements. So good P and good OR, which ones are going to be substitutes? So let's have a look here at B. B is yogurt and raspberry as substitutes. So they're not really substitutes, they're complements, aren't they? And then strawberry and raspberry, where they would be substitutes. So we can see that C is the most suitable option, and all we have to do is understand what the sign for the cross elasticity means. Negative being complements, positive being substitutes. Okay, in a free market there is a surplus of a good. What change would cause the market to come to an equilibrium? So again, just draw your demand and supply diagram. It's easily going to tell you, right? So here we're going to have our demand, here we're going to have our supply, and we know that a surplus means that the price must be higher than equilibrium, where demand will have a significant contraction, supply will have a significant extension, and we will have that area between here and here being the existence of our surplus. Okay, so what has to happen basically? We can see the price has to come down because we will have to have a contraction in supply and an extension in demand in order to fix our surplus and get back into this equilibrium. Okay, very straightforward. As is question 6. So, what happens to the value of PED when there is a movement from point X to point Y? Now, without even trying to calculate it, which you could do anyway, okay? It's very simple. We remember with the linear demand curve that the further we are up here, the more elastic we are. In a linear demand curve, somewhere around the middle, we're going to have a unitary PED value. I've shown this already on numerous of the past paper videos. 2024, I have a good few questions on it. And the further to the right we go, the more inelastic we become. Now, why does that happen? Here, when we're elastic, so the further we are to the left of the quantity axis, then that means that the numbers that we're dealing with are much smaller. Therefore, any change that happens around here is likely to represent a higher percentage change. Right? So if we're moving from X to Y, what we'll see is that the PED value is going to have to fall because we're moving from being at a point that's more elastic to a point that's more inelastic. And we can see that at point Y, we will have a more inelastic value of PED. Okay, so without having to calculate it, which you can do if you want to calculate it, go and calculate the PED. So calculate what the change would be. But once you know your linear demand curve, it gives you the answer. Which statement correctly describes the area of producer surplus on a demand and a supply diagram? So again, let's do a demand and a supply diagram to show you. Okay, so the consumer surplus is all of this area here. It is the area above the equilibrium price to the top of the demand curve. And the producer surplus is all of this area in here, the area below the equilibrium price to the bottom of the supply curve, right? Also referred to as being above the supply curve. So in our diagram we can see it's the area above the supply curve here and below the equilibrium price line. Okay, producer surplus has nothing to do with the demand, nothing to do here, and it's not above horizontal axis or anything like that. Okay, what is the least likely to increase as a result of a transition from a planned economy to a free market economy? Okay, so let's see. Prices of goods and services, they are likely to increase. Price controls would happen in a planned economy, and when we move to a free market economy, the competitive nature of private industries may result in those price controls having to be lifted due to less government intervention, which will increase the price of goods and services that are sold. Privately owned resources will definitely increase as well, because when we move from the planned economy to the free market economy, the resources will now be owned privately instead of being owned by the government, which is what they would have been in the planned economy. And structural unemployment is likely to increase as well. We know that when we move or we have a transition economy, it can create structural unemployment due to the fact that people are now punished for being inefficient at their jobs, whereas when they're working for the government, that is not necessarily the case. They're not always punished for being inefficient. A country's healthcare is funded by taxation but can be used free of charge by patients. What type of good is healthcare in this industry? Okay, so healthcare is going to be used free of charge by patients. Does that make it a public good? No. Healthcare is still going to be a private good, right? Because it's funded by taxation. It's going to be, or healthcare will have the characteristics of being excludable and rivalrous. There's only a certain limit or a certain number of healthcare that can be of healthcare services that can be used, right? And we know that healthcare and education are both private goods, but they're both merits at the same time. It's not a free good because there is factors of production used in it, and it is not a demerit good because healthcare generates benefits. It's a merit good. It doesn't generate costs like a demerit would. So private good and also a merit, same as education services. Okay, which one is zero opportunity cost? So if we move from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or 4 to 3, whatever it happens to be, any point that's along the curve will result in an opportunity cost because we're going to be reducing our production of the other type of good. So if we move from 2 to 3 here, for example, right, we are then having to give up some of good Y for the increase in good X that we will receive. Okay. However, if we move from point 1 to point 3, we will not have an opportunity cost because at that point we're inefficient at point 1, so we're just using more resources. We can see that our capability of producing good X will increase and our capability of producing good Y will increase. Okay, and last question. What will help to solve the basic economic problem? Again, I went through in other videos a little 5-word or 5-sentence synopsis of this stuff. You can look at those other videos for that. We said that using those we can answer any question. In order to solve the basic economic problem, we need to have the efficient allocation of scarce resources. Okay? Limited resources, unlimited wants, choice, scarcity, opportunity, cost. That's what covers our basic economic problem. Okay, any questions on any of these or any of the other videos, just make sure to contact me privately, and we'll sit down and we'll go through explanations in more detail if that's what you need. Thanks for listening.